Now, Don Griffin is with me, and Don, you're a life member of the Petone Club, so explain your connection to Eastbourne.
Well, Eastbourne's been my club since 1953 when I first left school, and it remains my club. And my association with Petone came through the pharmacy school, who were affiliated to the Petone Rugby Club. But I've managed the duo ever since.
And I understand those pharmacy teams were quite something in the day. Explain what they were.
Well, I'd rather talk about the Eastbourne teams. But they were a group of, I coached them for 19 years, and they won a lot of championships. They were a very intelligent group of people, who were lovely guys to be associated with. But I'd rather talk about Eastbourne. This is the day of Eastbourne.
Of course, and so take us through those initial years when you were at Eastbourne. You started as a player and then matured into a very fine coach.
Well, I started, as I said, in 1953. We won the championships, the second championship in that year, under the coach of Ray Sanson. And I played another year in the third first, and then I played 9 years for the senior B side. I'd like to just say a word or two about the coaches, because there was two people in those years who dominated Eastbourne, and one was Ray Sanson, the other was Clary Gibbons. And they were two of the finest gentlemen and the best coaches I ever ran into in my lifetime. And I owe them a great deal. I could tell you some interesting stories about both of them. But Ray Sanson, for example, carry legs, as we used to call him, he would, when Eastbourne was playing with the wind, he'd have a man or a boy on the beach, turn sixpence for him, and another one in Arua Street, turn sixpence for him, fielding the ball and getting it back quickly while we were playing with the wind. The moment half-time came, back over the fence, please. Yeah. But many of you here, of course, will remember Ray, and Ronnie Sanson, his son, is here. And many fond memories of that family, and Ray in particular.
We've got Murray Gibbons with us, and that's Clary's son, so we'll introduce Murray to the conversation. Now, your father was an incredibly prominent rugby man. He coached Wellington to a Ranfurly Shield win, and he was the president of New Zealand Rugby in 1967 when the 75th anniversary of New Zealand Rugby was celebrated. Tell us about your rugby experiences growing up with your father.
Well, I was quite young when that all happened, a lot younger than now, you know. When in 67 I was not old enough to be able to drink, so I was a bit peeved off that I didn't get invited to the centennial celebration of the rugby union. Dad reckoned he could have smuggled me in because I was only 17, but Mum wouldn't let him. Dad was an incredible enthusiast for rugby. He'd watch school kids, anything, as long as it was a game of rugger, he would be there and love it. And always happy to, buddy, afterwards talk to some of the younger players and say, listen, you could do that a bit better if you did this and did that.
That role as the Wellington coach, Ranfurly Shield winner, in an era where the Ranfurly Shield really meant something.
Yes, I remember, I'll tell you a couple of stories, was when in 1963, when they took it off Auckland, they went up and back by train, and television had just come in, so they were filmed getting off the Monday morning, coming off the train, and I had to go next door to our next door neighbours because we didn't have a TV at that stage to see Dad on black and white TV, and that was quite a buzz. And one other Ranfurly Shield story I'll tell you, that Dad always gave an example of the best sportsmanship he's ever come across was when they took it off Waikato. The entire Waikato team came down the following morning to the railway station at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning to farewell them. Can you see any team doing that today? It's a true story.
And so, Don, you also coached representative rugby too, and Eastbourne was the platform for that.
Oh yes, I owe Eastbourne a lot. Just coming back to Clary, he was a hard taskmaster, and he coached us pretty well throughout the whole period I was playing senior rugby here, even though he was a provincial coach. And let me tell you, he won the Ranfurly Shield for Wellington 3 times. But on one famous year, I think it was around about 57, and Johnny Delabarca was the captain. And we'd won all our games about halfway through the season, and we decided that we really were being overtrained. So we said, we've got to tell Clary this, it's just not on, it's just too much. So who's going to tell him? Johnny, you're the captain, you can tell him. So Johnny dutifully one night, Tuesday night, got up and said, Clary, the boys think they're being overtrained. What, he said? What? Overtrained? That is impossible. And if that's the way you want to run your team, I'm out of here. And he packed his bags and walked out of the dressing room. And we all stood there aghast. What on earth have we done? Johnny, see if we can get him back. Get him back. So Johnny ran out. He said he's gone. He's on his bike and he's going down the road. So we all sat there like stunned steers, wanting to do next. And suddenly he came back and he said, sorry boys, I shouldn't have done that. We'll have a light run. Out we went dutifully. We were only too pleased to get out there. At 11:30 that night, we came in absolutely exhausted, and I can tell you, no one ever mentioned overtraining again.
Well, if you think that was bad, Murray had to live with him.
I can add to that little saga. There was one time there on a cold, frosty Eastbourne night in the middle of winter, where seniors were out there training and things weren't going well. Dad was starting to swear, and next thing he knows, there's a policeman on the field, Constable Chapman, and he says, Mr. Gibbons, can I have a word with you? And Dad thought, my God, something's happened at home. So he rushed over and said, what's the matter, what's the matter? He said, I've had reports, people have been phoning up saying you're swearing. And his dad looked puzzled and he said, what do they say I'm saying? And the constable told him, he says, no, I was saying ruck, ruck, ruck. True story.
I remember that night very well.
Can I please ask you again about your playing career?
Well, I was bloody, it should have been an All Black, but the selectors wouldn't send me. I went to South Africa in 1970, and only as a supporter, and they all thought I was pretty good. They didn't have TV in those days over there, but they were so proud, because apartheid was really in, but they said, oh yeah, but when we get it, it's going to be colour. And they couldn't see the funny side of that. But they were most hospitable. Most times when we visited any rugby club, they'd say, old man, you're not a member, you can't buy a beer, I'll have to buy you one. And we argued for about 3 seconds. God, did we argue. So we had a marvellous time, and I had a few contacts that Peter Smuts Kennedy had given me 10 years earlier when it had been the last All Black tour in 1960. And they still remembered Peter Smuts Kennedy, and the contacts were still overjoyed to see New Zealanders and put us up. And we followed the All Blacks for 6 weeks, and I think it was only about 3 nights we ever paid for accommodation. We were always invited out, and we had it down to a fine pat in the end. You'd say things, any motor camps around here? Oh, Christ, man, you can't do that. You come home with me. And then the maid would come in the morning and find all these drunks in sleeping bags sleeping on the... this happened once, sleeping on her kitchen, and she threw a wobbly, so we fired her on the spot. We never felt so guilty in all our lives. No, I just wasn't good enough. But I was a good trier. I was good enough to be captain of Eastbourne Seniors for about 6 years, I think.
And I'm guessing you were the person who delivered the halftime speeches. Capture a halftime speech when Eastbourne was down and you rallied famously to win.
You can go off these guys, can't you? No, the coach was all powerful, especially if it was Johnny Lees. And the captain, we did as we were told. I mean, in those days, one man, you weren't allowed to have replacements. If you had a broken neck or something like that, and you had your head under your arm there. And the reserves were responsible for buying 4 oranges, dividing them into 4, so it's 16, 15 for the playing 15 that started, and 1 for the referee. Things were more measured in those days.
You talked about coloured TV being invented. Now we have 52 genders as well. I understand your point. Now, John Lees, 4 first-class games. One of them was for Wellington against the British Lions in 1959. You coached with him a long time, Don. Tell us a little story about John Lees.
Oh, Leesy, yeah. He was a typical first 5'8", sort of most of the world centred around him, like it does with all first 5'8". He was a very good player, and I remember him in the Ranfurly Shield era of Taranaki. He was first 5'8" in that game in 1959, and Wellington took a bit of a beating that day, and Johnny in particular made it pretty hard for himself that day. But he was a very competent player, and he played a lot of very handsome games for Eastbourne.
Well, the other problem with contemporary society is attention spans are short, but not short in this moment. We've really enjoyed having you here on stage tonight, sharing those wonderful stories. Buy these blokes a beer, they're outstanding. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Murray Gibbons and Don Griffin.